forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March.
Again, rebounded by Indiana. The game is over.
For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk,
Oh, he just sucked the gravity.
and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Dace.
Greetings. Welcome to this week's episode of Bigger Ten. I'm Steve Dace. My co-host Aaron McIntyre is here with me as well. Let's get to it as we begin with the big 5 stories this week on Bigger Ten. And I'm ready for some college football. Aaron, I don't know about you. I know the season just ended.
Of course.
But I'm always ready for some college football. It's only 220 long days until the next college football game. But if you want to get ahead of those markets with win totals and things of that nature, like I do, you're already busy putting together your power ratings, your analytics, and your metrics for 2020. And now that we've had both the early signing period as well as the deadline to declare early for the NFL draft, for the first time, really, we have a framework. Now, all the blanks have not been filled in yet. That's the framework. There's still some filling in around within that frame to do, but we kind of have the first framework of rosters for the 2020 college football season. And a few years ago, in order to get a better handle on some of the sports investing I do, I came up with my own metric to kind of answer what's the ceiling of teams? What's their potential? Because you can't just count returning starters and lettermen like we could when I was a kid, and you don't even know what a letterman is, given your age. And then you can't, you've got great analytics like what Bill Connolly at ESPN does, where he's counting returning production, because we have guys that only play in certain packages but don't start and don't show up as a returning starter, but they produced, so much at their position. And that's great for telling me how good the returning players on a team have performed. But I need something that tells me how good could they be, because we're in this era right now. Last year at this time, if we had debuted this show and I had opened up the show, or you, Aaron, and proclaimed LSU quarterback Joe Burrow, the former Ohio State transfer, was going to lead LSU, which had been shut out by Alabama 28-0, okay, was going to lead LSU to a win against Tua Tagovailoa in Tuscaloosa. They were going to go 15-0 when they had lost at least 3 games 7 straight years. Ed Orgeron was going to go 15-0. Joe Burrow was going to win the Heisman, throw for 6,000 yards and 60 touchdowns. If I would have predicted that a year ago at this time, people would have done what?
Who's Joe Burrow?
And then lost their damn minds. Yeah. Right.
I want some of what you're having.
Yes.
That's what they would have said.
New Year's is over, Steve. Time to get back to the land of the living. Well, you know what? That's exactly what happened. And that's what we're looking for is trying to measure how good are the guys we haven't seen yet? How good, what's the ceiling in terms of talent on any given roster? And so before the 2017 season, I came up with what I call the team total talent ratings, where I measure the 65 teams that make up the Power 5 and Notre Dame. Here's how they work. Now, this is just version 1.0. We'll be updating these for you several times between now and the start of the season. But I use the 24/7 Sports composite recruiting rankings. That's where they factor in the 3 major services of 24/7, Rivals, and ESPN. We give each player on the roster a point total based on the star they were assessed as a recruit. So 5 points for a 5-star, 4 points for a 4-star, etc. Now, we only evaluate the last 4 classes. So for this year, that's 2017 through 2020. That's because 5th-year seniors at the Power 5 conference level are just not as impactful or plentiful as they used to be. But if a 5th-year senior figures prominently on the depth chart, they are still accounted for. These are constantly being updated all offseason to account for the latest roster news, which is why we debuted these on January 20th, the deadline to formally declare early for the NFL draft. Thus, along with the early signing period come and gone, we have our first real look at what the framework of next season's college football rosters could look like. Now, to account for teams, and we have a lot of these in the Big Ten, to account for teams that are considered developmental programs. Thus, they don't recruit a lot of the 4- and 5-star prospects on an annual basis. And because their players tend to overachieve their incoming star rating, they are given additional points if they've done so. Let me give you an example. Minnesota quarterback Tanner Morgan was rated only the 1,185th rated.
I got to stop you right there.
Yes.
When I was doing this graphic, I was just basically copying from what you'd written on Wolverine Digest,
right?
Because you've published this already. I thought you had misspelled and just put an extra one in there. 1,185th prospect. No,
that's where he was in the 24/7 composite overall. The 1,185th rated prospect. Do you think he's played above that?
Just a bit.
Just a bit, yeah.
Yes.
So he's considered a 4-star in my metric. Now, you may be asking, what about players who underachieve their star rating? They are not lowered points, though, because the point of this exercise is to measure potential. And there could be mitigating circumstances beyond an overrated evaluation that is held a player back, like injuries, for example. And then finally, there are many players in the transfer portal right now awaiting word on a waiver to play next season. Therefore, several teams could be in line for a boost in these ratings between now and September. And the transfer portal has already been a boost to a program like Tennessee, you'll see in a moment, has an unexpectedly high score. All right. So with that in mind, again, this is just version 1.0. These will get updated again in February after the late signing period. And then all summer long and off-season long, there's going to be attrition. Your Iowa Hawkeyes just got a nice grad transfer today. In fact, that I just updated my spreadsheet. I would, if he's healthy, he would be rated a 4-star addition as a grad transfer. Is it Coy Cronk? I think
that's correct.
Offensive line transfer from Indiana, all right, who is a 40-game starter in the Big Ten. So these are going to be updated a lot. But for now, here is version 1.0, the top 25 most talented teams in college football. And you're going to see there's some tiering here. All 4 years I've done this, Alabama, Ohio State, and Georgia have been the 3 most talented teams in the country all 3 years. So you can see they've kind of separated themselves a little bit. Penn State is now the 4th most talented team in the country according to these ratings as things stand right now. But again, they had a player transfer, a 4-star player transfer, announce it yesterday. I think it's David or Daniel Jeremiah. So that's how these are evolving. Don't look so much at the point total or where your team is rated per se. I mean, yes, Florida has the 10th most talented roster right now with 297 points, but LSU is down there at 20 at 279, but that's, three right transfers that come in for LSU and they make up the difference. It's really about where you're at in relationship to where you want to go. Right. So you can see Penn State, after they were transfer portal U last year, they've done a good job of retention, another good recruiting class. They're kind of knocking on the doorstep roster wise of competing for a playoff berth. You see Oregon there doing the same. And you're going to notice Oregon is way ahead of any other Pac-12 team. Oklahoma clearly has the best roster in the Big 10 or the Big 12. Michigan is there along with Clemson, Notre Dame, and Florida. Those are the top 10 most talented rosters as things stand right now. We'll look at the Big 10 here in just a moment. But when you look at these national numbers, what stands out to you, Aaron?
Well, we said last week on the podcast, we talked about who outside of Ohio State could potentially vie for a playoff spot. And I think both of us, our gut reaction was Penn State. And setting all of this off the field stuff aside right now, I think that's kind of borne out in these numbers. If James, let's say all of that off the field stuff blows over.
The hazing lawsuit is what you're talking about.
Yes, the hazing lawsuit. Let's just assume all of that blows over right now, and they don't have the offseason of being transfer U, as you mentioned, like they did last offseason. I think it is realistic if James Franklin does as good of a job coaching as he did this last season, which I don't think there's any question with trying to replace both your running back and your quarterback, in a number of positions as well. He did a fine job coaching. If he can do that good of a job coaching with the talent that's coming back and that he's recruited this coming season or the season after that, there's no question that they need to be expecting a playoff berth or at least being in position to challenge Ohio State in the next couple of seasons at least.
I know this is Bigger 10, but I'll tell you this with LSU, both your coordinators, another position coach, 17 starters. That's what they have to replace from their national championship team. This might be the biggest rebuilding job I've seen ever for a program that wasn't on probation or undergoing a head coaching change. I mean, this is quite the roster and coaching staff overhaul they're going to have there in Baton Rouge, but they had a historic season this year, so right now they don't care about any of that. All right, let's take a look at where things stand now in the Big Ten. Again, Ohio State is a clear number one. Penn State is a few points behind them, and we have them at 323 right now, but knock off, I think, another 4 points, counting a late transfer. Michigan at 305. Those are your three dynamic recruiting programs in the Big Ten. Now, what do I mean by that again? These are the programs that recruit more 4- and 5-star commitments on a perennial basis than anybody else. Purdue is going to shock people being that much higher and number 4 right now. Now, again, let's not overreact. I mean, the difference between 284 and between 4th, like if I had Purdue 9th or 7th, you'd be okay with that, right,
yeah.
Aaron? But there's only 9 points separating those two numbers there between 275 and 284. The thing with Purdue is Jeff Brom has recruited very well, and they've retained a lot of players. They've not had a lot of attrition there at Purdue. So they're Indiana right behind them, Minnesota right behind them as well, even with some defensive losses. Nebraska is still maybe one recruiting class away from getting to where Scott Frost was hoping to take them and their fan base wanted them to go. Michigan State, again, add a few more points to Iowa with the transfer news today from Indiana. Wisconsin has been absolutely gutted by NFL early entries and even some puzzling attrition like Aaron Cruikshank, who was a good player for them in the Rose Bowl. He shockingly transferred. So those are where things stand right now in the Big Ten with the initial debut of my team total talent ratings. Your thoughts, Aaron?
Well, a couple of things right off the bat there. I think it's important to talk about which teams are most likely to exceed or at least come close to exceeding what they're projected to do, and then which teams are probably going to do worse than what they're projected to do. And so what I mean by that, Nebraska had a really talented, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, they had a somewhat talented roster coming back last season because Scott Frost has done a decent job recruiting there, but they have vastly underperformed that. And so even though they're in the top tier in terms of these talent ratings right now, I don't expect until I can see it on the field, I don't expect them to come anywhere close to performing 7th best in the Big Ten. I could be wrong, but again, it's just one of those things where I have to see it to believe it. Minnesota, now you actually did, I think if I remember correctly last year for your talent ratings, you actually did have them higher than a lot of people expected.
Yep.
And
I picked them to win the West and got mocked for it for months.
And then they actually did that. And then they, in some ways, exceeded the expectations too. So there are Purdue. That's another thing where it's like, well, they didn't do very well you've got Rondale Moore coming back. What's the name of that freshman receiver? David Bell that's coming back as well. They're going to surprise a heck of a lot of people, as you said, this year. And it wouldn't even surprise me if they outdid what they're projected to do right here. Although those big three at the top, they are, as you said, in a separate tier because of just the access that they have to the 4 and 5 stars. But again, Purdue, I don't, because of what they did last year, the expectations, the name Purdue, the at least in my age group, kind of the rap that they have is that they're just Purdue. They're going to sneak up, I still think, on a lot of people and really give a lot of people at least a huge test. And then in the bottom tier, teams on the downswing, that would be Michigan State, Wisconsin. Iowa is in a good position, but they've been gutted the last 2 years by early NFL draft entries.
Maybe more than any program other than Ohio State. And you all don't recruit at that level.
And so it's just
sooner or later that catches up to you.
Even more devastating as well. Yeah. And then you talk about teams that could, again, maybe be the beneficiary of the transfer portal. Let's see if Illinois can do that 2 years in a row. Now, they faltered at the very end of the season when they lost to Iowa and then just got demolished by Northwestern. But Lovie Smith, I think he bought himself at least a little bit of extra time. And so who knows what their offseason could be like. Wouldn't surprise me at all if that number ticked up pretty steadily throughout the offseason, if they can do something akin to what they did last year. Well,
you've got Greg Schiano at Rutgers is trying to follow that model right now.
Yes.
He's added a couple of transfers, including Michael Dwumfor, who's immediately eligible coming over from Michigan.
Yep.
So he's trying to emulate. He's trying to figure out, can I come up with 4, 5, or 6 guys that bring me to respectability right away?
And here's the thing I want to say. Well, last thing I want to say. When it comes to Northwestern, it doesn't matter what their point total is.
Agreed.
It really doesn't matter what their point total is. Here's the one area that it does matter. Who the heck is playing quarterback for them? If they can find a quarterback, then they'll be fine, because I hate Pat Fitzgerald with a burning passion of 1,000 suns, but I
love him. That's one of my man crushes.
I respect the dude. But he doesn't need 4 and 5. He's shown that over and over again. He's just going to have a quarterback who can make Iowa fans pull their hair out one Saturday every year.
Yeah, with Northwestern, they're the most quarterback dependent, reliant program in the conference. Every team nowadays you have to have good quarterback play. All right, you can't hide your quarterback in college football, but because Northwestern is even among developmental programs, they are a developmental program. So they need a playmaker at the quarterback position. If they have one, then the rising tide lifts all boats. If they don't, then it almost doesn't matter what the talent around him is, because they don't have, every year the personnel that most of the other Big Ten does. So they are the most quarterback reliant team. And the number one reason they disappointed last year, number one reason they went from, 8-1 or whatever they were in the Big Ten to 1-8.
Yep.
I mean, the number one reason they did that role reversal is the quarterback position. Hunter Johnson never panned out. The Clemson transfer and then the backups after him all got hurt. They were playing a 4th string quarterback during a chunk of the season. So you're right on with your analysis there of Northwestern. Let's get to some basketball. And this stat comes from Drew Hallett over at Rivals.com. Highest percentage of teams in Ken Pomeroy's vaunted basketball analytics, otherwise known to the cool kids as Ken Pom. Highest percentage of teams in your conference that are in Ken Pom's top 40. Look at this, Aaron. 80, you round it up, 86% of the Big Ten's college basketball teams are in the top 40 in Ken Pom. Here's what that means. You're basically playing a quad 1 game every night.
Yep.
All right. Half the teams in the Big East are. That's still an impressive number. 40% of the Big 12 teams are. 36% of the SEC teams. 33% of the Pac-12 teams. 30%, we were kind of bagging and dogging on Gonzaga's conference. There's their league right there with about 30%. According to this metric, their league's better than the ACC, for goodness sakes. The SEC of college basketball is the ACC, which is having a very down year with only 21% of its teams in the Ken Pom top 40. But 86%, that's insane. When you see those numbers, your thoughts are what?
Well, it tells me that, one, Big Ten country takes basketball really, really seriously. And to kind of, I don't know why that surprises me, but here's one reason why it might. And to take you kind of behind the curtain here a little bit, for Michigan podcast and for this as well, when it's football season, we are much more successful during football season, I would say, in terms of viewership, in terms of downloads and things of that nature. When it's about basketball, right back down the tank.
You mean like last week's episode?
Like last week's episode, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, it's just in the tank. But still, I'm not sure what the latest update of this is, but I believe the Big Ten still leads by a long shot the rest of the country in basketball attendance, college basketball attendance. So en masse, Big Ten country takes their basketball really, really seriously. And so that's why I'm trying to figure out what explains, especially over the last really almost the last decade, but especially the last, probably 3 or 4 years, just the difficulty of this league night in and night out for the most part. And I think it's just that Big Ten country takes their basketball seriously. They support it for the most part. And, at the same time, I think athletic directors, they're willing to put at least a few resources into making their teams successful and competent. So I think that's just borne out here. I think that's just the fruit of that. Or it could just be that the stars are aligning at the right time, at the exact same time for a lot of these teams. But 86% of the teams in the Big Ten are in the top 40 of KenPom. That is nuts. We probably won't see that again, but who knows?
What also helps the league too is that the demographic shift that is hurting the league in football, where you have seen a huge population migration to the states that have warm weather and lower taxes, and those aren't always red or blue states. You have states like Washington State that is a very blue state that has no state income tax, like the state of Florida does, for example. But that's where we're seeing the population migration, and that's where a lot of the talent is going. In football, when you have to have 22 of those guys at any one time, that demographic shift away from the Rust Belt and the Corn Belt here in the Big Ten down south or out west, or Pacific Northwest, I should say, hurts a lot more when you got to fill out a roster where you got to put 22 guys on the field every Saturday that are high-level players, 11 on both sides of the ball, right? But when it's 5, and we still have very high population centers here, and we're still producing enough players in our own footprint that we can populate all of these rosters in the Big Ten with enough caliber basketball players to be at least relevant from an NCAA tournament perspective. So I think that's where the demographics of you don't need as many great players in basketball as you do in football. I think that kind of helps as well.
Agreed. And I think I've repeated this oftentimes to you. I don't think I've said that on this podcast as well. A big thing as far as the national outlook goes, we're going to see more of what we're seeing in the Big Ten as far as the parity goes. I think we're going to see that nationally even more. Once you get rid of the one and done rule, I think with the NBA, you're not going to have a handful of teams snatching up the very, very top tier of the top tier college basketball athletes. So they're not just going to be able to run away. That also means that coaches like Coach K, Calipari, what have you, they're going to have to actually show what made them great coaches to begin with. So they're going to, there's a reason why they are where they are right now. But I think the just ease of getting the very best players and just letting them play by themselves, that's going to go away. And I think parity is going to reign a little bit more in college basketball than it has historically has for the last quarter century or so.
Let's honor some all-time greatness here. I mean, think of the point guards that have played in this league. Hell, just think of the point guards that have played at his school, all right? Guy named Magic, you've heard of him, right? I know that's before your time, but you know who that is.
Yeah.
Mateen Cleaves, Eric Snow. I mean, there have been some fantastic point guards that have played at Michigan State over the years, let alone in the entire Big Ten. But Cassius Winston at Michigan State is now the Big Ten's all-time assist leader, all time. And again, you think of all of the great point guards that have played in this league. That's incredible, and definitely something, Aaron, that needs to be honored. And here's the thing I hate about him the most. And I say this tongue in cheek as a Michigan fan. Okay, what I hate about him the most is that I don't hate him. Like, I want to despise this guy. He was originally committed to my team, or there was thoughts that he was going to commit to my team, I should say, and then he shocked everybody and went to Michigan State, and that's how we ended up with Xavier Simpson, by the way. And that turned out okay too. But I should not like this guy. All right, he lights us up every time we play them now. You look at the success he's had, but when you look at what he has represented on and off the court, all class, all the time, and that's what I hate the most, is I want to really dislike Cassius Winston. But I can't, man, because he just seems like a good human being, and that's not even counting the tragedy that him and his family are still digging out from and recovering from with the suicide of his brother, over, I think that was right before Christmas. So we wanted to take a minute here, dude, and honor a guy that in the pantheon of greatness that has been this conference in basketball since long before you and I were even born. This guy has now more assists than anybody else.
Yeah, and I'm starting to realize something, Steve, that I think greatness is, or at least some modicum of just intangible game, intangible something or another. Just the talent is, for me, that's judged by how long I think that somebody has been at their school. For example, Aaron Kraft at Ohio State.
Oh, yeah.
I swear. Now, he wasn't a great all-around player, but I swear that dude played for them for like 10 years because he was just so dang relentless. It feels like Michigan State has that every single year. I know Denzel Valentine was a guy that I thought was
National Player of the Year
for 20 years, even more so. Same way with Cassius Winston. And this time, there's, you mentioned with Valentine, Player of the Year. With Winston, all-time Big Ten assist leader. There's some stats there other than just my imagination to back up the fact that this guy really is great. And I don't know if you were able to see the coach of, I'm drawing a blank now, of Michigan State,
Tom Izzo.
Yeah. His little post-game ditty for Cassius Winston. That was really cool to see as well. And you don't really get these guys all that often. Even though it seems like they've been playing there forever, you just don't get to see this type of thing that often. So I hope the rest of the league and the rest of the fans in the league can really appreciate what we get to watch on a night in and night out basis with Cassius Winston.
The last time Michigan State had a player that I hated because I wanted to hate him and I couldn't was another point guard a little before your time, Scott Skiles, who went on to coach and play in the NBA for a long time. And dude was just nasty. And he talked trash to you. I mean, you could, the classic shoot it fat boy to Antoine Joubert in the Michigan State games in the 80s. But Winston doesn't do any of that. No junk, all business, no smack. And he's got what they call that old man game. And maybe that's another reason why I love him, because I'm getting older now, and he does play at old school, and he's just been, he's going to leave a tremendous legacy in this conference. No question about it. Let's close though with a school that we rarely get to highlight here in our conference for something good. And you can see that with Aaron's little graphic there that says they're good at something. Rutgers basketball ranked in the AP top 25. These stats courtesy of Mike Hall over at the Big Ten Network. He says the last time Rutgers was ranked in men's basketball, which was, I think, over 40 years ago, he was not alive. The Miracle on Ice had not happened, so we're pre-1980. I think he's talking about the 76 team that went to the Final Four, where we technically had 3 Big Ten teams in that Final Four now, because as in Indiana and Michigan were in that Final Four too. It's just Rutgers was not in the Big Ten yet, all right? So this is before the Miracle on Ice. ESPN, which began in 1979, did not exist. Only one Star Wars film had been released, all right? So that was 1977. So this is probably 1978 then, the last time Rutgers was
41
ranked.
41 years, yep.
Mae West, the classic platinum blonde actress from yesteryear in the golden age of Hollywood, was still alive. That's the job Steve Peichel has done. And let's do this too. Remember, the best player in their program, or at least so we thought, because a lot of us were high on them at the end of last year. They were very competitive all year long in conference play. Yeah. And they had all these guys coming back, right? And they had that one really gifted big man whose name I can never pronounce. And after the season was over, when Rutgers was on a lot of surprise teams for this year's list, he shocks them by transferring out to Oregon. Do you remember this?
Yes.
And I think a lot of us thought, man, poor Rutgers cannot catch a break. It looks like the stars are finally aligned for them. Mm-hmm. And then their best player just ups and transfers out as a senior to go out to Oregon and play for Dana Altman. Well, they haven't skipped a beat without him whatsoever. I've seen bracketologies. Now, we're still about, 58 or so days away from Selection Sunday, so it's way too early yet. Particularly if you're in a league where every night you're playing a quad one game, there's going to be a lot of carnage around here. And then get to the Big Ten tournament where, that's going to be last one out alive, basically. You're not going to win that thing. You're going to survive it, okay? But just for giggles, I've seen, I think Lenardi and Jerry Palm have them a top 4 seed in their latest bracketologies.
And they deserve it. So far.
Absolutely, they do. And that guy, Steve Peichel, is a hell of a basketball coach. What a job that he's done. They've got one of the coolest little home court advantages at the rack there in Piscataway. We've been waiting for Rutgers to do something for this league other than just help us to use the New York television market for price points for selling of advertising. It's about time they were good at something around here.
Well, you mentioned the demographic shift in the Big Ten as far as basketball to football goes. They're in an area where they should recruit at an exceedingly high level. There's no question about that.
Yeah, because they only need 2 or 3 of those guys, not 9 of them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. They should be recruiting at an exceedingly high level, and it looks like they finally got the guys that are really going to help them do that. And they have been playing really, really well, as you said, so far. And the gauntlet that we talked about just a few topics ago. They're going to have some off nights. They're going to have some rough nights, but they're a type. They really are a type of team that we see this with a team or two every single year in the tournament, where they just come together and everything clicks on all cylinders at the right time. And if that happens for Rutgers, the sky's the limit, especially this year with the way that things are shaping up across the board nationally. If things click at the right time, the right way, and on all cylinders, you could say that for a lot of teams, but especially for Rutgers, they could be in for a really, really special season.
They remind me a little bit of Texas Tech last year. Now they don't have a lottery pick like Texas Tech did, but the way that they defend and the way they play, the rest of the guys play their roles, they remind me a little bit of Texas Tech last year. And that's also why I don't know unless they have a couple of key injuries. I don't know that you're gonna see them have a dip the rest of the way. They're gonna lose some games because they're in this conference. I don't know that you're gonna see them lose 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 5 or have a situation like Ohio State had right now that Michigan's trying to avoid getting themselves into with 3 out of 4 losses, because the way they play defense, that travels. And I can't wait to see them against Iowa tonight, because you talk about a complete and total contrast of styles.
Yep.
Between how your team wants to play and how Rutgers wants to play, and watch each side try to impose their will of tempo on the other, because the other side is not equipped to play the way that the other team wants to play. You are not equipped to win a game against them 62-59. That is not how you guys play basketball. Mm-hmm. And they aren't going to beat you guys 80-78. Okay, so it's going to be fascinating to see how that works out between those two teams tonight. And you know what? We have that every night in the Big Ten because of how deep this league is. We'll come back and play our weekly game of Would You Rather next right here on Bigger Ten.
Bigger Ten is brought to you by Michigan Podcast. If you like what you're hearing today and would like to support us, head on over to Patreon, patreon.com/Michigan Podcast, where if you live somewhere where sports wagering is illegal, you can find Steve's picks for various games. So far in basketball, college basketball this year, he's been on fire. That's patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. You can get his game day picks, which he posts almost every day now for just $5 a month. In the process, you can say thank you for creating this podcast on YouTube or via podcast, wherever you listen. Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast.
Time for our weekly game of Would You Rather here on Bigger Ten. Aaron, I'm up first. This one is for you, brother. Would you rather be Juwan Howard or Chris Holtmann right now? Meaning 2 basketball teams that were both ranked in the top 5 early in the year, that have hit a bit of a snag. For Ohio State, it's been a lack of scoring and some issues with suspensions, and they've got a player with an appendectomy. For Michigan, it's that the most polished and skilled player in the program, Isaiah Livers, has been out for a month with a groin. That is really just that simple for them. And no word from Juwan Howard of when he'll be back. There's some scuttlebutt maybe for Saturday against Illinois. Which of those 2 coaches right now would you rather be, though, in terms of getting your team back on track?
Unlike anything else that you and I work together on, we actually kind of show each other what we're going to be talking about, a rundown. We're kind of prepared for this show a little bit, at least a little bit more. And so I saw this yesterday, and I've been thinking about it for the last 24 hours, and it shouldn't be that hard, but it's kind of a difficult proposition.
I agree that it's difficult.
I would rather be Juwan Howard, though, right now. I just trust the leadership on Michigan right now. Specifically,
you mean the roster within Xavier Simpson? Is that what you mean?
Xavier Simpson specifically. I just trust that leadership more than I do what Ohio State has right now, because I think it's nothing necessarily against Ohio State. I just have not seen them dig out from either holes they dig themselves over weeks at a time or in games. I've not seen that mental toughness that I have seen, even though it was with the former coach at Michigan. I have seen Xavier Simpson and those other guys. They have actually overcome some adversity before. So I would just put my trust in those players right now more than I would just about anybody on Ohio State's roster.
Yeah, I can see that. But I think, first of all, I think Chris Holtman's a very good basketball coach. I could almost justify going the other way on that, just on the basis of you don't know when Isaiah Livers is going to get back. Like, if you knew it was going to be another week or two and you could plan that out definitively, that's one thing. But the uncertainty, particularly the rookie head coach, can be an issue as well. All right, your turn.
All right. This is a similar one. Would you rather be Richard Pitino or Pat Chambers right now?
I think I'd rather be Pat Chambers. And the reason why I'd rather be Pat Chambers is both of these teams are led by one defined star player and then another couple of guys that are good, good complements. For Minnesota, it's Oturo is the star. Malik Carr and Tauscher are your complementary players, or Marcus Carr, I should say. For Penn State, it's Lamar Stevens, and then you have Mike Watkins and who am I forgetting?
There's a couple of different guys.
Is it Dredd? Is it Miles Dredd? Is I think who I'm thinking of. Okay. Here's why I'd rather be Penn State and Pat Chambers, because with Stevens can be your primary ball handler for Penn State as well in certain situations. He can get his own shot when things bog down. You can take Marcus Oturo out of a game to a certain extent because he relies on the ball coming into him elsewhere in the offense in order to score. So I'd rather be Pat Chambers because I know that, it's never a bad shot if I just say, guys, we're just going to clear out, run a ball screen, Lamar Stevens, do your thing. At the very least, it might not go down, but three things are going to happen. I'm going to get a good look, he's going to get fouled, or I'm going to score. All right. Three things are going to happen. Two of them are good. Yeah, two. All right, so the third one is, you can't do anything about. Sometimes the ball just rims out, but it's not like he's dribbling that ball off his leg, or it's not like he's going to head into a double team and pick up a cheap charge call. In fact, I guess I could throw in a fourth thing, which is he kicks out for somebody else for an open look. So, yeah, I think I'd rather be Pat Chambers in that scenario. This one for you, Aaron. Would you rather draft, if you were an NBA GM, would you rather draft the aforementioned Daniel Oturo or your beloved Luka Garza?
I want to preface this by saying something that you've said of your boy Xavier Simpson, that never count him out of anything. There are a lot of intangibles that Luka Garza brings to the table. I mean, he is a high effort, high IQ, highly skilled guy. However, I would take Oturu. If I was down to those two choices, I'd take Oturu in a heartbeat. Luka Garza, he's not a naturally gifted athlete. He's a very good athlete. He's not a naturally gifted athlete. He is, and I know you probably won't know this name, but if you were an Iowa fan last year, it was inescapable with good reason. He is the men's version of Megan Gustafson, who was just an amazing center for Iowa, the Iowa women's team last year. Great, dominating, night in and night out, dominating player who I think she got cut maybe a week in to the WNBA season, or maybe right before it started. There's not the skill set there, and there's not the natural gifts there athletically that you need to be in the NBA. All that is to say, don't count him out, but it's just not. If I'm looking at pure athleticism, I got to go with Oturu.
I think you're right, because in the NBA, you have to be enough of an offensive threat to justify whatever defensive liability you are. And that's kind of what you're saying. Yep. Now, he's got another year of eligibility, though. Mm-hmm. And with his size, if he can become a 35, 38, 40% three-point shooter on a consistent basis. And now he doesn't have to play the 5 in the NBA, but can be a little more like a stretch 4. I could see him being a guy that could have 10 years in that league as a key reserve. If that doesn't, that's a part of his game right now, but at the NBA level, because of the lack of quickness he has defensively, it'd have to be a feature, not a fringe benefit of his game.
Right. So last one's for you. Would you rather have an otherworldly offense and an inept defense in the Big Ten East, or the inverse in the Big Ten West?
So in the Big Ten West, would I rather have a great defense and an otherworldly offense? I think I'd rather have the otherworldly offense and the inept defense in the East. Because as much as the East is considered the better division from a recruiting standpoint, we're seeing that even in the Big Ten West, it's really difficult to win. You've seen that you've seen this as an Iowa fan. It's really hard even in the Big Ten West to win 21-17 every single week. It just the way college football has changed and the advent of the offense and the rules that have helped the offense. I would rather take my chances. I mean, we've got defenses now that when they go up against quality opponents, if I give up 30 points, I think I can win. That gives me a chance to win that game. I think that the game of college football in and of itself has changed. And as a guy that roots for a team that's had an out of this world defense for a few years and didn't win the Big Ten East because offensively we couldn't score enough points. In the end, last year the 2018 Ohio State defense was one of the worst the school's ever had. One of the worst they've ever had, Aaron. But they also had the first quarterback in this league since Kerry Collins 25 years ago to be drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. And he threw for 4,000 yards and 40 touchdowns, basically broke all of Drew Brees' single season passing marks in the Big Ten. And they went 12-1 and won the Rose Bowl. I think finished number 3 in the country with that defense. So that's my answer. Give me the offense.
Understood. Makes sense.
We'll come back, find out the results of this week's Twitter poll and this week's question of the week next.
Bigger 10 is also brought to you by Wolverine Digest from Sports Illustrated. You can find that at wolverinedigest.com. For all of you Michigan fans, you can find a daily rundown of all the hottest topics from basketball and football to recruiting and much, much more. That's wolverinedigest.com, a part of Sports Illustrated.
This week's Twitter poll. Look at these results. We asked you, well, this was my question this week. Do Big Ten fans have a right to complain about improper benefits offered to players and prospects elsewhere, like in the SEC, when we've had Nasser, Sandusky, Strauss? I mean, these are just absolute fiends in our own league. 57% of you say yes. 43% of you say no. Aaron, your thoughts on those results and how you'd answer?
This is why we can't have nice things, I think, sometimes. I mean, do we have a right to complain? There's always human nature comes into this. There's always, well, Penn State is over there. Michigan State's over there. Mm-hmm. My institution's doing just fine. And then there's also the improper benefits thing. A coach buys a Coke for a player's homeless mother. Something like that.
The kind you drink, the Coke you drink, you mean.
The Coke you drink, yes.
Somebody representing Louisville basketball who won a title with strippers and hoes might think, why didn't we think of that? Yeah. Right, exactly. Yes.
Coca-Cola wants to buy a Coca-Cola to some player's homeless mother. Stupid ass stuff like that, guys. Those are the improper benefits. And sometimes it is big dollar things like that as well. But it's just, if I were to take this poll and I had to take it so I could get the results and pull them up here, I would say to hell with this. I'm not answering that question at all because it's so dumb. And it's not a dumb question. It's just the premise that you have to answer from for both sides, that you have to justify in your own mind is just so dumb that it's not. It's not a question that can possibly be answered with any sort of a clean conscience, in my estimation.
Right, you got to kill some level of self-awareness, no matter which side of the equation you fall down on. This week's question of the week comes from Zach Wittenberg, who says, "Did you know 11 Big Ten teams received votes in the AP basketball poll for the first time ever? Ever. It's never happened before." And no, Zach, we didn't know that. And now we know. But I think that's actually more impressive than the Ken Palm thing. And here's why. The Ken Palm thing is more meaningful because that's an analytic that gives us information that is useful. The AP poll is a beauty contest. But that's also why I think, Aaron, it's more impressive to get 11 teams in there.
Yep.
Because Ken Palm is just looking at box scores and running his algorithms, right? He's the old statue of Lady Justice with a blindfold. Okay, he doesn't care. He doesn't care about your team, your emotions. He's just out for the bottom line here. That's not how pollsters operate. And a lot of this, because this is subjective on the pollster side, and it is a glorified beauty contest, to get so many of your teams simultaneously on that radar, I think kind of speaks even more to the depth of your league than the analytics do, because I think that's harder because that other process is so subjective.
I couldn't agree more at this. This is like, it's like the looks of Miss South Carolina and the depth of knowledge of IBM's Watson all rolled into one, because that's the first analogy that popped into my head for some strange reason. But it really is, when you can impress writers like that across the country to vote for you, probably against their own conference or their own team in their backyard, you're doing something right. 11 out of the 14 teams receiving votes in the Big Ten, that's pretty crazy. And like you said, that's not, Ken Palm is definitely more meaningful. The net rankings actually are the most important as well. But when you're getting that much attention from really snarky, finicky beat writers and writers across the country, you're doing something right, and you're getting a lot of attention, and it's deserved, as Big Ten fans see on a night-to-night basis.
That's going to do it for this week's edition of Bigger Ten. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Bigger10, and we'll keep you updated on all of our thoughts in between episodes. For Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Deace. We'll see you right here next week on Bigger Ten.